Our first lesson this morning is from Numbers chapter 22, verses 7 through 12 and verses 21 through 35. So the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with the fees for divination of their hand, or in their hand. And they came to Balaam, okay. And they came to Balaam and gave him Balak's message. He said to them, "Stay here tonight, and I will bring back word to you, just as the Lord speaks to me." So the officials of Moab stayed with Balaam. God came to Balaam and said, "Who are these men with you?" Balaam said to God, "King Balak, son of Zippor of Moab, has sent me this message. A people has come out of Egypt and has spread over the face of the earth. Now come, curse them for me. Perhaps I shall be able to fight against them and drive them out." God said to Balaam, "You shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed." So Balaam got up in the morning, saddled his donkey, and went with the officials to Moab. God's anger was kindled because he was going, and the angel of the Lord took his stand in the road as his adversary. Now he was riding on the donkey, and his two servants were with him. The donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with a drawn sword in his hand. So the donkey turned off the road and went into the field, and Balaam struck the donkey to turn it back onto the road. Then the angel of the Lord stood in a narrow path between the vineyards with a wall on either side. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, it scraped against the wall and scraped Balaam's foot against the wall. So he struck it again. Then the angel of the Lord went ahead and stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn, neither to the right or to the left. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, it lay down under Balaam, and Balaam's anger was kindled, and he struck the donkey with his staff. Then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and it said to Balaam, "What have I done to you that you have struck me these 3 times?" Balaam said to the donkey, "Because you have made a fool of me. I wish I had a sword in my hand. I would kill you right now." But the donkey said to Balaam, "Am I not your donkey, which you have ridden all your life to this day? Have I been in the habit of treating you in this way?" And he said, "No." Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with his drawn sword in his hand. And he bowed down, falling on his face. The angel of the Lord said to him, "Why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? I have come out as an adversary because your way is perverse before me. The donkey saw me and turned away from me these 3 times. If it had not turned away from me, surely I would have by now killed you and let it live." Then Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, "I have sinned, for I did not know that you were standing in the road to oppose me. Now, therefore, if it is displeasing to you, I will return home." The angel of the Lord said to Balaam, "Go with the men, but speak only what I tell you to speak." So Balaam went on to the officials of Balak.
Our gospel passage this day comes to us from the Gospel according to Matthew, there in the 25th chapter, beginning at the 14th verse. "It is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to their ability. Then he went away. The one who received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them and made 5 talents more. In the same way, the one who had 2 talents made 2 talents more. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of the slaves came and settled accounts with them. The one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents, saying, "Master, you handed to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 talents more." His master said to him, "Well done, good and trustworthy servant. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will give you charge of many things. Enter the joy of your master." The one who had 2 talents also came forward, saying, "Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 talents more." His master said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter the joy of your master." Then came the one who had received the 1 talent, saying, "Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you had not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here you now have what was yours." But his master replied, "You wicked and lazy slave. You knew that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For to all who have will more be given, and they will have in abundance. But from those who risk nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and a gnashing of teeth." So end our lessons for this day. This morning I would entreat you to think of a time you have done wrong. Not just where you made a mistake, where you spoke inaccurately, but where you have wronged someone, either by things you've done or things that you knew you should have done and did not, or telling someone else to do something that you knew was wrong. Years ago, my father-in-law and I were driving in a car through a different town, and we approached the traffic light that was green and saw a truck ahead of us turning left. And so we pulled over to pass him. What we hadn't seen was that he saw someone perpendicular in the cross street whom he recognized, and he encouraged her to come into the intersection. And when our cars collided, hers flipped, and she died. Our car was totaled, and the truck driver drove away. Years ago, I came to the church early, as is my custom on Sunday mornings, and someone, seeing the lights on, came in. At first, I didn't recognize them. They were so forlorn, so agonized, and wearing a white uniform. And then I realized it was a nurse who was an elder on session, and she'd just gotten off from the night shift. She described it had been one of those horrible nights where there were so many accidents and so many tragedies. And finally, as the last thing they did, a family came in with their child who was very, very sick. And the doctor prescribed codeine. And she went to the pharmacy, and instead of taking the vial that said C-O-D-E-I-N-E, she picked up the one that said C-O-C-A-I-N-E. And after she had injected it into the child, and the child went into convulsions, she realized she had done wrong. And they quickly administered Narcan and brought the child out of it, but now she felt she was responsible for causing harm to this child. We talked a long time, and we prayed, and described that no matter what happened, she would not be alone. that her church and God and her pastor would be here with her no matter what. She was not alone. And she left. About 10 minutes later, a car drove into the church, and out came a young couple in their 30s who were the son of the clerk of session and his wife. And they said, "We just had the most horrible night in our life. We took our child to the ER, and a nurse gave the wrong medicine." Several months went by, and the nurse and the parents did not know that they were both part of the same church until communion, when the elder was serving the couple and their child. There are times we do wrong. We are human beings. We choose wrong. And yet we're not abandoned. We're not alone. Still we can be forgiven. Still we can make amends. Still we are loved. There are certain passages that each of us choose as being our passage. We know this story, and it's one we identify with. Come on in, Jacob. You know where Mom is. Mom's over on this side. Right over here. Come on. Yep, Mom's right over here. When I was about Jacob's age, on one Sunday morning, my father preached a sermon in which he described that his son's favorite television show was about a talking horse, Mr. Ed. And I was so proud to sit in the congregation and have a shout out from my father that his son's favorite television show was Mr. Ed. When I was 25 and heard my father preaching another sermon in which he described that my son's favorite television show is Mr. Ed, I was a little less pleased. When I was 45 and had children of my own, and he again said my son's favorite television show is Mr. Ed, I asked him to come up with a new illustration. Balaam for me has been one that I continually come back to with great affection. When the Hebrew people came through the wilderness into the promised land, they were a great number, a fearsome army. So much so that all the other peoples, the people of Moab, the people of Midian, as well as the Egyptians, had been greatly afraid of them. They were so much in number. And the king of Moab, Balak, sent emissaries to the wizard, to Balaam, asking Balaam to curse this people that they might die. And Balaam said, "Before I do anything else, I need to ask God and stay here this night." So they did. And that night, Balaam prayed to God, and God said, "Do not curse this people. This people are blessed. This people are chosen." So Balaam sent the emissaries away. But several days later, they came back again, now with greater money and greater authority, entreating him a second time to go and curse this people. And now Balaam changed his mind and did what the crowd wanted. And Balaam went to curse the Hebrews. But as he got on his donkey, the donkey refused to go the direction he wanted him. And he hit the donkey. And the travel went on further, and the donkey leaned up against a wall and pinned Balaam's leg there until it hurt. And again, he kicked the donkey. And the donkey went on further, and then suddenly the donkey lay down and refused to move. And Balaam hit that donkey and cursed it for what it had done. When suddenly the donkey opened up its mouth, and the donkey said, "You donkey, don't you see the angel of God who is right there in front of us, about to chop off both our heads with a sword?" And suddenly Balaam realized that the donkey had greater wisdom than he did. The donkey had seen God where Balaam had not. And Balaam repented. And Balaam chose to do what the Lord instructed instead. And Balaam, instead of cursing the people, offered them a blessing. It's a wonderful story. It's one of these fables that we listen to, and you want to believe that the donkey could talk. There are many different stories in the Bible that we read through, and we think, what a lovely, cute story. It's like Aesop's fables. It's like one of the great Greek myths. But in our heart of hearts, we believe that these are miracles. These don't really happen. If we were to have a wedding here at the church and there were 10 bridesmaids and 5 of them showed up late, we would not lock the doors to keep them outside. If there were laborers and there were business owners who needed workers and they came to the hiring place and they found several just lying around all day long, at the 11th hour, who among us would hire them and then pay them a full day's wage? These are stories that logically just don't seem to make sense. They're in the Bible with a moral, but they couldn't really happen. That Samson, the strongest man in all history, would suddenly lose all his power because his hair got cut? That Jonah would get swallowed up by a fish and taken to the bowels of the earth until he prayed? That a woman who was 80 years of age and had never had a baby before suddenly would conceive and carry that baby to term? That a virgin would conceive and give birth to a child? Those don't seem possible. And yet we have this story this day. That there was a man who, going on a far journey, gathered his people to him and gave to one 5 talents, and to another 2 talents, and to another 1. In April of 2012, having known South Sudanese refugees for several years, I went to South Sudan on your behalf to reunite the lost boys with their lost families, to gather them together and demonstrate to them that you thought your child died 20 years ago. Here they are restored to you as an adult. And along with it, we made a commitment to build the first clinic. And over the next 10 years, we raised $350,000 a year for 10 years. And the last 2 years, through grants, we've been able to receive $3 million that has gone to feed the people. So in total, if my math is correct, over these 12 years, we have raised and spent nearly $10 million to provide health care and food to 3 million people, to allow 3 million mothers and children to have a full and healthy life in spite of war and pestilence and poverty, and restored eyesight to the blind. When I was there a dozen years ago, I gave $3,000 to a deacon of the church to buy oxen and plows, that they might plow the fields and raise their own food, and $1,000 to the chief of the tribe, that we might have one who was in prison released and set free, and to a woman who asked for it, $5. And when I came back 2 years later to see the clinic that was built there, it was awesome. This was not a story in the Bible, a great myth or fable. This had come true. We had given a few talents, and it had been made into so much more. The oxen were there plowing the fields. The man who'd been in prison was set free. And the woman with $5 took me to her tent and dug inside, and pulling out the snail shell, inside was that $5 buried in the ground. I struggle with this passage because oftentimes in a parable, when it says a man was going on a journey, or a king, or a lord, we're referring to God. But here, it is described that that man was one who reaped where he did not sow, and gathered where he had not gathered seed. And his instruction to the man was that he should have gone to the bank and invested this money and gotten interest off of it. That practice of charging interest to give back to the owner more is called usury, and it is against the law in the Bible. So God would not instruct the people to break the law. God would not be one who reaped where God did not sow. This has to be about someone else. It's about us and the ways in which we give, and people make more out of it and sometimes choose not to act out of their fears, out of their broken trusts, out of their doubts. This passage has always caused trouble for people as to why it is that some receive 5 talents and some only receive 2 and some just 1. What we know from economics is that in that time, a day's labor was worth a denarius. And a talent was worth a year's wages, working full time. So 1 talent was an incredible sum, more than people had ever seen in one lifetime gathered together. And 2 talents or 5 talents was an insurmountable amount. But those who had the 5 talents and those who had 2 traded with them. And for being responsible, they received double the amount. So that when the landowner came and asked for a reckoning, they were able to respond with what had been earned, and he was able to take what they had and from that say, now you will be responsible for so much more. But those who were filled with doubts, those who refused to try, those who wronged the owner, they lost it. I don't believe it's so much a curse on the one who would not try as a realization that if we cut ourselves off, if we choose not to try, if we are bound up in our fears instead of in our trusts, we are alone in a place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. Would that all who feel alone would know that we are not isolated, but instead that your church, that your God, that each of us are with one another in the midst of the struggles. You are never alone, but are loved.